Joining me now to talk about this, General Jack Keane, retired four-star general and Fox News senior strategic analyst. General Keane, sir, welcome back as always. The 40-mile convoy is still stalled for a variety of reasons. I don't know, whatever day this is. What do you make of that, General?
Well, that's obviously a very good thing. What this operation has certainly shown is the lack of planning and execution logistically by the Russian general staff. And clearly, the operations that they conducted in Georgia, much smaller scale, in eastern Ukraine in 2014, considerably much more smaller scale, was relying on largely unconventional forces. Even in their after-action report, they said they should have used more conventional forces. They could have taken more territory. So they never had an operation quite like this. And it's obvious that lack of experience, and particularly for the planning of it, has really come up short. So there's major logistics problems, and the fact that they're having such serious logistic problems makes the convoy very obviously vulnerable to the Ukraine resistance, and the combination of that is quite deadly. So they finally have gotten once again, Larry, to the Hostile airfield where the paratroopers were there in the early days. Paratroopers are back there now, and that's on the west side of the city. They intend to encircle the city from the west and also encircle it from the east. They made a little bit of progress on the east side, but they've got a very long way to go. They'll encircle it, hammer it, then because their artillery be in position, they'll hammer it with rocket artillery, with tube artillery, likely bring some aircraft in as well, and Kyiv will get a pounding. But we're some time from that. This campaign for Kyiv could take some time now based on the operational problems that they're having. And clearly the mission here in Kyiv and also in Kharkiv is to topple the government, encircle these major cities, force the government either to surrender or kill or capture the elites and leaders of the government. That is the political objective that has been assigned to the military. Their objective is to seize control of these cities in the north. In the south, they are making some progress. They intend to cut off, for the Ukrainians, cut off access to the sea. And Mariupol is a part of that. It's encircled. It's being hammered. There's no electricity in the town. It eventually will fall. Kherson has fallen, and it's more in the central and the south. And then Odessa is further to the west at the end of that. At the end of that red that's on the map there, on the left-hand side, is where Odessa is. Large amphibious ships approaching it. They're going to wait for the ground troops from Kherson to get to Odessa, I think, before they conduct a coordinated attack. The Institute for the Study of War, which I'm associated with, is forecasting they will likely be able to achieve their military objective here in the south. That's where we stand. Putin is bringing forces in as far away as the east coast of Russia, near the Pacific Ocean. They're on rail cars as we speak. It's going to take days for them to get there. He's had a limited reserve called up. We got to watch and see if he increases that or even goes to something that would be unheard of, full mobilization. But Putin is determined, Larry, to accomplish his objective, and that is to topple the regime, turn it over, and install a friendly government, despite the obvious issue, and it's such an elephant in the room, that the Ukrainians will fight him tooth and nail after that as an insurgent force for as long as it takes to get rid of the Russians. Putin seems to have dismissed that. He doesn't appear concerned about it, but it's certainly something that we should be planning for, along with NATO, to help the Ukrainians during that phase of the operation, if and when the government is toppled.
Just one more avenue or take on this, General. I mean, up to now, instead of toppling the Zelensky government, what seems to have happened is Zelensky has become a world figure because of his courage and steadfastness. He's become a hero. Putin has become perhaps the most demonic, evil, hated guy on the planet. I don't think anybody could have foreseen that. And then there's this other issue, General Keane, reports that there have been 3 assassination attempts on Zelensky, but that Russian Secret Service people who don't really like what Putin is doing somehow warned the Zelensky people off, so the assassinations haven't happened, which of course increases Zelensky's stature and further reduces Putin's stature. What you think about all that?
Well, I think it's remarkable, but it's not surprising that there's dissension here in his secret services, in his intelligence services. We already know there's been some generals that have opposed Putin taking Ukraine. I mean, I would suspect that most of the agencies in Putin's government, there are some opposition to what is happening here. There's a humanitarian aspect of it, but it's also the reality that Putin is going to make Russia an international pariah, and they're going to be largely condemned, you know, for committing war crimes here. We may even see Putin facing a war trial in absentia. Of course, he's not showing up for it. So I think that is an issue. I think that issue is going to grow. There's a lot of false reporting to the Russian people, Larry. I mean, for them, the war is still in the Donbass region. That's what their state TV is talking about. They're not talking about pummeling Kharkiv or taking down Kyiv. They're focused on that. It's a special military operation, quote unquote. It's not an invasion of Ukraine. They're there to put down genocide. That message is still what is pummeling the people. But fortunately, most of the people have a phone. And there's other information that's getting to them, certainly from relatives and friends, et cetera. But you're right. I mean, this dissension and objection to Putin, I think, will grow over time inside his country. But listen, those of you who are saying Putin's going to be gone in a short period of time, there's a guy that's been in power for 22 years, Larry. Yeah. I think he knows how to protect himself here. And he's insulated. The service that he's close to are his Secret Service people. That's the largest entity in his government. What are they for there? To protect him and preserve the regime and keep him in power. I don't think he's going anyplace soon because he knows how to protect himself. As horrific as he is, he's no longer the strong man who's respected and feared. He is now one of the evil thugs that'll become a historic figure who has no moral compass whatsoever.
All right. Yes, sir. General Jack Keane, thank you, sir. Appreciate it very, very much.